Okay, I'm going to talk through some of the work for you project in Comp4. The examples can be found in the prototypes file, which is in the Dropbox folder for year 13. This is a data dictionary. The data dictionary is a file which describes information about the files that you're holding. We have records. In this example we have pupil and we have books, two different records, and the records have attributes, data that we're storing on these records, pupil ID, first name, score, so this is the name of the field or the attribute. We have a description that describes what the data is, and we have the data type, whether it's a string or an integer or a boolean. We have the size. We have a description of whether it's mandatory or not. For the primary key it will be mandatory and duplicates will not be allowed, and for other fields it will vary. So the first name will not be mandatory and duplicates will be allowed. Here we have a book ID, so once again it's mandatory and duplicates are not allowed. Where appropriate we can list validation rules here for numerical fields, date, numbers. We have ranges, so we can do a range check, and we have some sample data. So this is one method of describing the data, and this is used in the analysis stage to understand our data. There are other methods. In a project from last year, one pupil used a data dictionary that looked like this. It has less information. Here are the entities here, but the validation description was given later in this document in the design section. So this is one method of doing it. Now go to look at the data flow diagram. In the data flow diagram we have several different objects. We have external entities, and these are the sources of the data that are flowing into the system, the people or things that they come from, and they're also the places where the data is sent out to. The data may be sent out to a person or perhaps a thing. In the case of an employee wage system, the data may be sent out to a bank account. So in this system we have data coming in and it's processed. There's a process, the data flow, and the data store. So the external entity sends data into the system via the data flow, and there's a process to save this into the data store, and there are other processes that read from the file or the data store, and these processes may read from one or more files and then produce some kind of output and send it to the external entity. And this is a level 1 data flow diagram, and the level 1 has perhaps 3, 4, 5 processes. All of the data stores are present. All of the external entities that have the inputs to the system and the outputs from the system are present, and the 0 level, the context level, looks exactly the same as this, except this is all a black box system. That means you cannot see inside it. All you see are the data flows going into and out of the system, to and from external entities. The data is flowing to and from external entities into and out of the system. So this is 0 level, this is level 0, or context level. Level 0, otherwise known as the context level, which just shows the system as one diagram. And then we look inside the black box and we see this. If we were going further, which you do not have to, we would then split these processes up and look at what processes are involved in adding a new cadet, editing their details, deleting their details, etc. All of the processes within inside that, and processes within inside the equipment. And here we're going to contrast that diagram with a project from last year, level 1. You see we have a data store, data flows, a process, an external entity. So external entity sends in the loan details of something that's borrowed, and the details will be written. Some of the details will be written to this table and read from this table. The valid name is flowing here. The details are being written to this table and read from that table. Another process here is writing to this table, reading from this table, sending information to another process, and writing to an external data. Here I'm looking at an entity relationship model, also known as an abbreviated to an ERM, and it shows the entities in my project and their relationship. An entity is something of information about which, something of importance to the system about which information is stored. And in this entity relationship model we have a pupil can borrow one or more books, a book can be loaned to one or more pupils, and this is a many-to-many relationship, and we put a link in the middle of it, whereas a pupil can have one or more loans and a book can be assigned to one or more loans, but a loan can be made for one and only one book, and a loan can be made to one and only one pupil. That's a loan at any one time. It can be made to one and only one pupil, or a loan is associated with one and only one pupil. So we have a verb in between here describing the relationship. Pupil can borrow, or book can be loaned to, and this describes that. So this has two entities and a link. Now we'll look at the description of the test plan. You need to consider when you're doing your test plan several different tests. You want to test normal data, which is normal acceptable data within the range but not on the boundary. Extreme data, which is acceptable data or valid data but it is on the boundary of a range check. Abnormal data, which is invalid data, and invalid data should produce an error message, and that's outside the boundary of a range check. And we can consider tests for type, so we can do a type check. If it's an integer, we can type in characters to see if it produces an error message, so this would be invalid data and should produce an error message. And size, we should do a test to exceed the size of the data. A couple other checks we can introduce and test for are presence checks. These are normally beyond primary keys, key fields. A presence check is a mandatory field. That's the kind of thing when you're logging on to Google, you have a little star by it that you must fill in these fields. And a null value, meaning a blank field, if you try to submit the record, should produce an error message. Also duplicates, once again, if you're logging onto a system and you try to create a new username but the username already exists, it's a duplicate because the username is used to uniquely identify the user, and you'll get an invalid data, and you get an error message here telling you that the username already exists and to choose a unique one. So these two can be used for the key fields. So in the test plan we have a description of a test ID to identify the test, a description of the rule that we're testing, or this mandatory primary key, no duplicates, the data range, and it may just be a report or a button press because we have data and actions, a description of the test, what it's testing, and what test data you're using for that particular test, a null value. This one's going to be valid, then when I use it the second time, because duplicates aren't allowed, it will be invalid, but it's the same test data I'm using. And here's the test data that I'm typing into this field. So this is my test data, but it's also action. So for instance, it might be a button press, if you're pressing a button to test that navigation functions correctly, or a search button functions correctly. You may have a search term and a button press. And then the expected results. You're going to expect some error messages, or you'll either expect an error message, or you will expect the data to be accepted and it will appear on the record, or you may expect the in the case of navigation, for the button to print something, a list sent to the printer, or you might be ask you if you want to exit, or it may take you just to another form if it's a navigation button. You'll also include columns for actual results and pass or fail, but these won't be used until you run the test after implementation. So right now we're creating the test plan while we're coding, and these fields will be left blank for now.